And the two main sources of revenue should be the value-added tax, a simple arm's-length value-added tax, without FBR interference, and concomitant income tax. That will give you efficient revenue generation and also distributional equity. I have a large number of additional slides on a tax agenda for the next budget. I don't think I have time to go into it. So I will stop here and perhaps come to, I'll just briefly show you what's on the other slides. These are the alternative sources of additional revenues. Don't go back to trade taxes. The Afghan trade needs to be looked at. Asset taxes, well, these have been problematic worldwide. You can think of Ushur and Zakat, and in this book that I had done in the 1980s with Professor Lord Stern, we had looked at the issue of Ushur type taxes in agriculture. There's some potential. Property taxes for the local level, do it, but do it right. Learn from Latin America. There's a lot of experience there. Bogota has done a fantastic job, but you have to start with Gulberg, Clifton, GOR, Riven, and Islamabad to really have an impact. Local level. All income should be subject to tax, regardless of source. That may require some adjustments to arrangements with provinces, and I'll come back to this issue in the next seminar. Corporate tax, you need to consolidate to one rate, downwards, not upwards. And with a credible minimum asset tax, which is quite common in Latin America. I won't go into it, but the fact of the matter is in early 2009, there were 47,000 corporations, and this was the tax they paid. Very few. So if you bring in a gross asset tax, and this is done very frequently in Latin America, as a minimum income tax, you can raise the corporate income tax rate at the same time as reducing the rate, you raise the collection. And again, we can discuss this if you're interested. But alternatives to VAT, no. Income taxes will not do it. Property taxes will not do it. Really, there is no alternative to a property. You're going to need that. And if you think that you're going to get this from any other, like manna from heaven, well, God help us. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Dr. Ehtesham. I'm going to ask both Dr. Anjum Naseem and Dr. Faisal Bari to comment on Ehtesham's talk. I don't know if I need to introduce you. Faisal Bari is currently the Senior Advisor South Asia for the Open Society Foundation and is currently on leave as Associate Professor at LUMS. Dr. Anjum Naseem is the former Dean and Provost of LUMS University, and he's and Professor at the Lahore University of Management Sciences, and currently working with us at Ideas. Okay, let's start with them.
Thank you, Rehana. Thank you, Ehtesham, for a very comprehensive and eloquent exposition of the macroeconomic and fiscal challenges facing Pakistan. The title of your paper poses a question: does Pakistan face a crisis? Your analysis answers the question in the affirmative. The revenue generation tax to GDP ratio is nowhere near what Pakistan promised in 2008 to the IMF when it negotiated the standby arrangement. The reserve position may look robust today, but 9 billion, as you said, out of 14 is IMF money, which becomes due very soon. And when repayments begin and reserves start to deplete, the market will panic as it did in 2008. Capital flight through formal and informal channels will set in, and reserves may deplete in no time. And we will be in the same precarious situation as we were in 2008. The following questions therefore come to mind, some of which you have addressed yourself, also answered, but I'm going to revisit them in my own way. Did Pakistan negotiate an agreement with IMF on which it could not have delivered? In other words, was it realistic to commit to a tax GDP ratio of 14% within 5 years from the 2008 budget targets, budget levels of, I believe, 10% or so? If the macroeconomic crisis, the second question, if the macroeconomic crisis is heading in the direction that you analyze, as indeed it seems to be the case, then why isn't there a frenzy in the corridors of power to stem the tide or tsunami that seems to be heading our way? Why are the political parties and parliament not realizing the enormity of the problem? And if they are, why are they not showing the same seriousness of purpose that they showed in reaching consensus on the 7th NFC award and the 18th amendment? Or is there a case of asymmetric information, something that the government knows that we don't? The third question, given that Pakistan has not come close to delivering on its commitment and its credibility is in tatters, will a new agreement be possible with IMF, and will the terms be more stringent? If Pakistan has not delivered on the 2008 commitments, how will it convince the donors that it will deliver on terms of agreement that are even tougher than before? Let's turn to the first of the three questions. The average tax to GDP ratio in Pakistan has declined from 13.4% of the GDP in the 1990s to 10.6% in the first decade of the 2000s. The ratio seems to decline when the GDP grows above trend and rises when the GDP grows below trend. Part of the explanation of the decline between 1990 and the first decade of 2000 is the rebasing of the national accounts in 2004 with 1999-2000 as the base. So this was a new base. The GDP was inflated because of the rebasing. The ratios went down. As you rightly point out, the reduction in international taxes without a compensating increase in GST is another explanation of the decline. The decade also saw a major effort to restructure the tax administration at a cost of, figure 150 million or so, and as you say, it's come to naught or almost come to naught. It appears the role of tax audit and assessment had been completely abdicated during most of Shaukat Aziz's term as Prime Minister. It is thought that this was part of a deliberate FBR policy to improve the image of perception of the tax department and to bring about a cultural change in the organization. It was hoped that this would encourage voluntary compliance. As part of changing the tax culture, there was a conscious effort to make the tax officers unobtrusive and almost invisible. This luxury of relying almost entirely on voluntary tax compliance was also made possible because there was fiscal space available and the pressure on raising tax revenues was less acute. This absence of tax audit for many years has also created an expectation within the industry in which there is much greater resistance to tax audits. The absence of audit of the export sector has another explanation which you have pointed out today and in your earlier works. This has to do with the application of GST in Pakistan. The GST tax operates more often as an excise tax than as a proper value-added tax. Several sectors of the economy, mostly with large shares in exports, namely textiles, sports goods, surgical instruments, leather products, carpets and rugs, are exempted from payment of GST. The argument for exemption is that bulk of the output of these industries is exported, and since exports are zero rated, it creates a large demand for refunds by exporters on GST paid on inputs. Careful scrutiny of these refund claims is time consuming, and funds of companies can be tied up for long periods of time. Without such scrutiny, fraudulent operators can take advantage and cause major revenue loss for the government. The newspapers these days are in fact reporting a case in which rupees 10 billion were fraudulently claimed as refunds. The bureaucracy also uses refunds or payment of refunds as an opportunity for graft. The delay in refunds and the side payments is a drain on companies which are major export earners for the country. The exemption from GST avoided the issue of refunds and graft, but broke the input crediting chain and reintroduced cascading. The additional, and this is directly a quote from one of your papers, the additional implicit taxation of exports was offset by an effective suspension of audit. Today you have suggested that there may be a subsidy involved in this scheme for exporters, which may be in violation of the WTO rules. The 2008 agreement was being negotiated in this backdrop. The tax administration, which for several years, with the help of huge World Bank loan, had been trying to model itself as a modern tax administration, but had failed. It had deliberately been kept away from serious tax audits. It had little capacity to audit modern corporate sector. It had failed to implement a proper value-added tax and had instead converted it into an arbitrary SRO-driven excise tax. The export sector had been co-opted by replacing the zero-rated system with a system of exemptions and no audit. There was also a strong lobby in the business community which had developed against the GST. To sign off on an agreement that promised an integrated goods and services GST, which would raise the tax GDP ratio by 3 to 4 percentage points in 5 years, was grossly unrealistic. While I have no doubt that the government of Pakistan would have been fully cognizant of its limitations, the donors were naive to have assumed that Pakistan would deliver on these terms. Let's turn to the second question. If all political parties can come together on the 18th Amendment and the NFC award, why are they unable to agree on tax reforms? The planned extension of GST to sectors of the economy which are currently exempt and to the services sector was part of the effort to increase the tax GDP ratio to 14% by 2012-13. This effort has run aground, at least for the current fiscal year. The ruling Pakistan People's Party and one of its ally, I believe the ANP, have supported the imposition of GST on the exempted sectors, but one of its former coalition partners, the MQM, and all opposition parties, or virtually all opposition parties, have opposed the tax, which is called the RGST, Reformed GST. The attempt by the federal government to impose a flood tax met with the same fate as the RGST. The proposed tax was a one-time tax and would have added another 10% to the income tax of the existing taxpayers. It was meant to cover some of the unexpected expenditures incurred on those displaced and affected by the unprecedented flood that hit the country in 2010. The tax was also in response to the call by international donors that if Pakistan was seeking international assistance for flood victims and for rebuilding lost infrastructure, then the rich Pakistanis should also play their part in rehabilitation and rebuilding. The opponents who previously argued against the imposition of GST on the grounds that its incidence was on the poor and that the rich should be taxed instead, now argued that the tax net should be widened and the existing taxpayers should not bear the burden of tax evasion and corruption, which it was suggested was of the order of 600 billion in terms of evasion and 500 billion in terms of corruption. These are figures quoted from one of the spokesmen of a political party. The woes of the